Friends, family, countrymen, lend me your ears. This is Tim with another episode of America the Battlefield. Why is it a battlefield? Because, in the words of that classic old patriotic song, America the Beautiful, which it's a play on words, I believe that the true battlefield and the freedom for the common man is right here in the United States of America. And as goes America, so goes the world. Today I'm joined by my Marine buddy, Dacquel Ochoa. We've known each other for a number of years. We met right before the COVID madness, and she has a little story to tell about that affect her life in deep and profound ways. And without further ado, we're going to have a really casual conversation today about how we met, how we woke up, and the things we're doing to get active and involved in our local and state governments and our communities. Let's bring it over to Dak, my friend, former Marine Corporal.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Tim. I
Yeah.
appreciate to be here and to talk with you and your audience. We've gotten a chance to know each other over the last few years. Like you said, I'm a Marine. I am a 4641, 4671, which is combat camera and video for the Marine Corps. I enlisted in 1993 and was active duty to 1997. My big hoorah in the Marine Corps was putting together the Crucible, and I'm hoping that sometime later on that we can talk about that and how that's contributed to training. Fast forward today, where we are very, very similar in our training to the other services. But before then, even though I spent 4 years active duty in the Marine Corps, I've been a military brat my entire life. We had a chance to talk with my dad not too long ago. My grandfather, my father were both in the military. They were soldiers in the United States Army. And then I grew up in the Army as a brat from day one. My dad, was on the drill field, when I was born. And so I very much lived a life where we moved around every 3 years, following my father. April, it's what, today's the
17th. Yeah.
And April is the month of the military child. And I definitely lived that life, following after my father, a patriot. And, there's 5 of us in my family. The youngest one, even though my dad was retired, she lived a very, very different life than myself because, like I said, my father being retired, she didn't have all the challenges that I had moving around the world. So, every years we moved, had a new batch of friends, but no real roots. I'm very much a kind of a tumbleweed type of a personality. So until, just recently, again, I'm always like the roaming gnome moving about. I left Yuma. We had homesteaded here for quite a few years, and I got a chance to move to DC right before COVID. And so that was very, very interesting. The borders were open here in Yuma, Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that it would be impacted in such a great way, but it was, but just not in the way that it was portrayed in the media and in places like DC.
The mainstream narrative.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Stayed open, but the humans, as we call them here in Yuma, they kept everything open. Since the borders were open, we very conservative lot here in Yuma overall. And so the churches stayed open, restaurants, some of them did struggle and fall away, but then there were the opposite end of that spectrum where there were a lot of businesses that blossomed because people were adamant about coming out to support local mom and pop stores, restaurants, and so, and that made that was a huge impact when I would kind of call around back here to friends and family and see what was going on. And it was shocking by comparison because I was in DC in the thick of it. I lived about 15 minutes from the National Mall area. So, I mean, I would go down to support the Trump rallies, and the entire National Mall area, that lawn that's right in front of the Washington Monument and all of that, covered, covered. But I will tell you that shortly afterwards, you would not see any of that in the mainstream media. It
Yeah.
was removed.
It didn't help their narrative, did it?
No, it did not.
The
As a matter,
red wave.
yeah, I was even interviewed.
Mhm.
And, if you look up my name, it might pop up in a few times that I have done that. But they completely remove anything of substance that I had said that day.
Hmm.
Support of the president, they removed it. So that just goes to show. And you and I, when we were in school, like beyond or before the Marine Corps, you and I both went to the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale.
We did, and we found that out later on. We both attended the same school.
Yes. So there's about 2 years of a difference, but I bring up the Art Institute because part of my studies as a videographer there was, photojournalism.
Mhm.
And I took an advanced course while I was in the Marine Corps for photojournalism. And that said, you kind of know the history of what led to the type of media that we have today, and you juxtapose that for coming up. I'm a Gen Xer. I came up in the 80s, and at that time, you really had four television stations back in the day.
Yeah.
There wasn't any cable media. It was really, well, what I'm getting at is that journalism has changed so much. Like
Mhm.
during we had like four channels, that being, ABC, NBC,
CBS.
and then PBS.
Yeah.
Right? And then shortly thereafter, HBO came on scene. They kind of changed a lot. MTV came on scene in the early 90s.
Hmm.
And then going into the 90s, you had this phenomenon that I feel that we are in the repercussions of which now, because MTV made a name for itself, most especially for the Real World series.
Yeah. It was one of the first reality shows, right?
Is the absolute first reality show.
Okay.
Tagline for that was "Get Real," and come to find out, all of it is scripted.
Yeah.
Every part of it is scripted, and we're just kind of coming into that knowledge now, and how jump cuts back in the day, we were taught you can't do a jump cut for anything less than 6 seconds because it messes with your psyche.
Hmm.
So, that being taught in our editing classes in school back in the day, now all of a sudden you had MTV who was challenging that information, and you were having those immediate jump cuts.
Yeah.
Fast forward to now.
Nickelodeon did that too,
That's right.
memory serves.
And not
My
only,
mind's going crazy right now.
yes, your mind is going crazy right now.
Yeah. I keep remembering all these things, and the cable news network came on the scene.
Right.
Like 24/7 news. Like, oh my God, news junkies all over the place.
And so when the war broke out in the early 90s, Desert Storm,
Mhm.
you had CNN be embedded with everything that was going on. It changed how they portrayed the news.
Mhm.
And I think that will roll like perfectly into Wag the Dog, right?
They
That's
were
one of,
doing Wag the Dog segments in a movie set with, remember
absolutely
the fake air raid? The
right.
journalists were putting on their helmets.
Yeah, the whole thing is everyone assumed that the threat would be over because it was early morning. But the thing about Saddam Hussein is that he has never done the expected. And right now we have, once again been surprised with the unexpected, an air raid, an apparent attack, although we can't say what the outgoing missiles hit, at approximately 20 after 7 in the morning Saudi Arabian time. the crowd, a white say. Okay. My apologies for that. He's putting on a gas mask. There hasn't been any gas dropped here that we could tell. You smell anything? No. You may smell some of the fumes from a missile exhaust going off. The missiles use a rocket, a cordite, some sort of burning. We just heard a little thump just then. But I have to apologize for that. I caught a whiff of something and felt momentarily dizzy. You're more experienced. Military. The top 10 things about Saudi Arabia. Maybe we could shorten the list to 5.
Oh God, Geopolitics by Dan Quayle.
Je suis un journaliste américain. Wolf. 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 Oh, I love this country so much.
You guys just don't have a clue.
Well, Cheryl, it was almost exactly 2 hours ago when the sirens went off here in Saudi Arabia. Where we are in eastern Saudi Arabia, there was no problem. It was almost exactly 2 hours ago when the sirens went off here in Saudi Arabia. Where we are in eastern Saudi Arabia, there was no problem. However, there was an intercept elsewhere near the capital city, Riyadh. We've got some videotape of that you can take a look at right now. Hi, Atlanta. We're about to have a short course in missile identification. This is a Scud. You can tell it by its distinctive label. Now, when the missile is launched, the first thing you look for is the plume sticking out behind it. Now, when you detect this, you can tell it's been launched. Thank you.
Graffiti on it? Yeah, show me graffiti.
Larry King show or bust. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this shit. Look at.
Believe that. Let me say hi.
Yes.
But
And that,
people at that time, I don't think they had the mindset to critically analyze information like our generation.
I think that I agree with you. I think that it was difficult in that time for the fact that they were somewhat emotionally removed from everything.
Mhm.
You know, like wars prior, people didn't see anything in real time.
No.
It changed the narrative. Like there was an effort to directly control everything that was coming in. You know, what
Yeah.
where they could, you know, it's on radio, so you have these families that are sitting around the radio listening.
Hmm.
You could do the Orson Welles kind of thing and scare people into doing this, that, and the other. But now you actually had journalists that were on scene and embedded with a lot of military. And
Yeah.
so that really changed the control factor, where it went from, hands off to really hands on in terms of manipulation.
I just had an epiphany, and this happens a lot when we talk. Think about the delay of the people back in World War II that had to go to local movie houses to watch the newsreels. By then, they were how days old, weeks old, months old? It was irrelevant.
Right.
They were getting old news.
Right. Absolutely. And, another Marine that I know basically said the same thing, that things are happening in real time.
Hmm.
And, now people have, they have it's divisive in the sense that there are going to be people who still have those rose-colored glasses on,
Hmm.
and then other people that are closer to the fire that kind of understand what's at stake. And, now we've all been red-pilled. And so I find that fascinating. That's something that we talk about all the time.
We do.
Mhm.
We've talked often about just having a show deep diving into our red pill moment and the way it felt at the time, being pulled out of the matrix, sometimes violently, for
Oh,
people I've known. The withdrawal period we had to go through.
yeah. For me, that happened really early on.
Mhm.
I lived in Europe most of my young life, and there were just things that they gave me a framework. Let me say that. It gave me a framework
Mhm.
that I of comparisons to how, what was going on in Europe during the time of the Cold War to what happens in America. I can compare and contrast generationally even. So when I came up and I was living in Germany, it was during a time where you had service members who were they would pull duty on the school buses. They were
Hmm.
full. They, wore the body armor to its extent at the time, and they had, rifles and magazines, and they were ready.
Yeah.
Uh, this was on a school bus, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And it was very normal. This was during, like I said, the Cold War time period. And, we were brought into, you said, a movie theater when we got settled. And, basically the command had said, your family needs to be on their best behavior.
Yeah.
Are unofficially ambassadors to this country. And so if there's any problems with your dependents, be it your children or your wife, you will be sent home. And your service member, typically being the father, would have to finish out his time in service there until he was able to come home. And so, I think all of the military brats during our time were fairly well behaved because our parents really kept us under good watch. Given
And
the
disciplined.
absolutely,
Yeah.
just in that scenario, you were taught like you cannot open the bus windows. The bus being, it was a military bus like you see today,
Hmm.
but white. And so, as they traveled through the local community, we were told, do not open the windows because somebody could throw a grenade into the bus.
It sounds like a balance of public relations and operational security
Correct.
in your position. And your
Right.
dad, just for our audience, the context, your dad rose to the rank of master sergeant in the army.
Yes, that
Yeah.
is right. Um, but yeah, myself being day one, think about as a child having situational awareness,
Hmm.
as young as 5 years old,
Yeah.
you know, and knowing like if there's a package in the hallway, if something looks off in any capacity, make sure that you tell somebody because these are all things that could potentially do harm to the entire base, to the entire post, as it were,
Yeah.
as an army brat. So,
You
yes,
learning that situational awareness probably compelled you to be red pilled at an earlier age than the average person.
yes. And so my story specifically, I was 9 years old.
Hmm.
And that was because my family was targeted by a trafficking ring while we were living in Germany. So
Wow.
it's pretty crazy.
I haven't heard this story yet.
Oh,
Wow.
it's so we were living in well, let's see. We were in Hanau. We were in Han
Jeez.
we were in Hanau at the time, Hanau, Germany, and
Second Marine Division.
I
Sorry.
know don't
Represent.
I didn't bring mine next time I
Oh
look.
man.
Yeah.
Drinking in the library. Yeah, it'd be great.
So yeah, I was in Hanau, Germany.
Hmm.
Father was stationed there, and my mom's family. My mom comes from a wealthy, fancy Asian family.
Mm.
My dad's more of a pirate jungle Asian by comparison,
I
but
respect him so much after the talks we've had.
he's a great guy.
And we're gonna have him on and it's gonna be epic.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm looking at that. So my mom's family,
Hmm.
she grew up wealthy and she had a nanny back in the day, and that nanny had a daughter. Her name is Maria, and Maria ended up as a um, like a mail order bride. I was kind of struggling for the term,
Wow.
but she was a mail order bride. Basically, it started off as a
Huh.
pen, and then later on, she came to Germany. And so at that point, my mom's old nanny had called her up and just asked her, like, "Hey, can you check in on Maria and make sure that she's doing okay, because obviously the cultures are different
Hmm.
and going to need some support. Can you do that? And of course, my mother was, obliged. This was someone that was very dear to her. And so that was really kind of the framework of how this all unfolded. It was just, there was no way of my mom or my dad suspecting that it was going to go the way that it went.
Hmm.
So we met with the person. His name is Gunther. I'm using real names here because, this was back in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So that said, like Gunter, he presented well, seemed like a really nice person. I was young, I was 9 years old. And we went to go visit his home and his mom and all this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Everything checked out. Um, and then they supposedly had a lover spat, so we had to go pick her up. Now, mind you, where she was located and where we were located is like 5 hours, a 5 hour drive.
In
So,
Europe? Wow.
yes, on the Autobahn. And so we went to go pick her up. And then a little bit later, they made amends and they even brought another Filipina lady. That's my ethnic background.
Hmm.
They brought another Filipina lady, basically trying to smooth everything over, saying that, it was a lover's spat and it should be fine. Gunther really loves her and we'd like to have her back. So she goes back, and fast forward maybe a couple months after the fact, we get a phone call in the middle of the night where Maria had called my parents.
Hmm.
She had jumped out the window of the house that she was in, and she
To
jeans and
escape?
escape. So she jumped off of the second floor, if I
Hmm.
remember correctly. She ran into a cornfield, I believe. And in the morning, she said that she had seen this elderly couple. I think they
Hmm.
were a dog.
This sounds like a really good crime drama.
Oh, no, there are many times I get freaked out because I've seen some crazy movies that
Hmm.
very resemble this story and it freaks me out.
So I've never heard the story. Was the Filipina lady like some Ghislaine Maxwell honeypot person?
Man, yes, sir. Yes, he was, or she was.
Man.
Yep. It turned out to be exactly that. We didn't realize it till far into the storyline, but she had escaped, and it turns out that she was being drugged and raped by the entire town, to include the judges, the police officers, everything.
It reminds me of Rambo 5 Last Blood. Have you seen that?
I don't
The
think
cartels, the sex trafficking cartels.
I think I've seen like little bits and pieces of it.
Man,
Fine.
it's hard
But
to
what
watch.
I think I was watching Hostel years and years ago.
Mm.
That storyline was, something similar where you check into like a youth hostel. And of course, I've done all those things,
And
having
you
grown
don't check out.
don't check out.
That
Yeah.
movie was dark.
And so that really bothered me
Hmm.
because, you know, of that whole Maria experience. But
Hmm.
she ended up losing her mind when she was staying with us.
Hmm.
I was kind of watching cartoons that morning, and there was like a news program, like an update, like this is what's coming up on the afternoon news.
Hmm.
And I remember very vividly, there was an ambulance that was on the television, and it was in German, actually, because we were watching German cartoons at the
Hmm.
time. And there
Were they
was
subtitled?
no, it was just kind of in the background.
Wow.
And I remember that Maria had come out of her room and she was livid and she was talking to my mom a
Hmm.
certain time. And my mom is, she's the lady of the house. You don't
Yeah.
talk to me. But she was a different person. Her eyes were just emblazoned. She was very much in her fight or flight mode.
Hmm.
And she approached my mom and she was telling my mom in Tagalog, or in Bisaya, which is our dialect. She was telling her, like, I know you. I know that you have betrayed me, is what she was telling my mom. And my mom was like, Maria, what are you talking about? And Maria
Was
was
it
very,
mistaken identity?
yes. So
Okay.
what is the sirens and everything that was on the television kind of triggered her,
Hmm.
and came out and she confronted my mom, accused my mom of all these things. And of course, my mom didn't know what was going on. My mom's a stay-at-home mom, and so my mom's not a very worldly person. She grew up very sheltered because of her upbringing, but
Hmm.
she something was up to the extent that she called me over and she said, "Grab your brother and your sister and lock yourselves in the kitchen." And what she said
Hmm.
was, "There are knives in there," right? So in other words, be prepared to defend yourself
Yeah.
because there's something wrong with Maria.
Wow.
Um, Maria went back into her room and my mom called. We had a Filipino community there. And so my mom called a doctor, my auntie Dahlia. And from there, like a lot of the Filipino community that we typically would hang out with as a family on the weekends for barbecues and things like this, they all came over. Again, that whole scenario, come to find out, triggered the fact that she was being drugged and raped by any number of people.
Let me
Uh,
ask you, how covert was Maria about her trafficking activities?
I don't think that she was at all. I think that she was very, very naive coming from, the
Hmm.
Philippines at that time. And she was drugged. She was, I think she told my parents at some point,
Hmm.
remember that she had given me some clothes.
So they were using her as an asset?
They were, yeah, well, they were an asset as in like she was, no, I don't think she was an asset in terms of spying. Like she was actually being trafficked. Like she herself trafficked.
Oh, I meant the Filipina trafficker lady.
Um, the Filipina trafficker lady, just for all intents and purposes, we can call her Karen.
Okay.
But Karen, I think that she knew exactly what she was doing. Yeah,
Hmm.
I definitely think that she was a madam in that case.
And
Um,
she had her protection rackets like firmly in place if the whole town was involved, right?
oh yeah, the whole town, and the most interesting part is that at one point my parents had to go and negotiate for her.
Hmm.
Went back onto that. I'm going to call it a compound now because
Hmm.
so my parents went back to go pick up Maria, and they had to negotiate for her freedom. I don't know what
Hmm.
that inside, but my sister and I, we were out in a van, in the family van, and the family van was a custom build. So we had a bed in there in the back area, and we were just kind of laying in that bed waiting for my parents to get out. But in all honesty, my sister and I, we saw henchmen up on the roof. They were carrying shotguns.
Hmm.
And recently, I asked my dad, I was like, did you even really know that there were henchmen on the roof when you were getting Maria out of that situation? And he's like, no, I did not know that.
So their job was to keep it a secret, and she was a loose cannon. They couldn't afford to let the story get out and be brought to justice, right?
Absolutely. So, in summary, yeah, my red pill started when I was 9, just being exposed to the reality of the world and being aware of it. And I think that once you're aware of that kind of evil, you you see it for what it is. Like I had to learn to, again, situational awareness at the bus stop. If there was, my dad used the example, if is a car, a little red car running around and keeps circling, that is a threat. And you need to, get your siblings and find, some place to shelter in place until we get to you.
Hmm.
So, like I said, that's my red pill moment. Being, caught up in this really horrible situation as a child and being able to see that life is not, you know, through rose-colored glasses.
Yeah, like the dark underworld, the underbelly of what we're finding out about the deep state right now, the
Absolutely.
trafficking networks.
Well, Blade says, this is a sugar-coated topping. There's another world underneath. That's darker than what most people really want to that they want to understand. They don't want to know. They are blissfully ignorant of the. But for people like me who have, gone and lived in a that situation, it's hard to unsee, and it's hard not to look for it in the everyday narrative and just see all the holes. So,
Thanks for sharing that, Dak. I know it's not easy to take a walk down that memory lane, but I appreciate it. And in the next segment, we're going to talk about what it was like for you to be a Filipino woman in the Marine Corps in the 90s, and the diversity and the affirmative action that you experienced and all that stuff. But first, a little housekeeping.
Love is our resistance. They'll keep us apart and they won't stop breaking us down.
All right, so you can find us at my blog, americathebattlefield.blogspot.com. You can find us on Rumble. You can find us on YouTube. And we're on X also. Also, if you like this work and you want to support this content, you can donate on my Patreon page. You can buy me a copy. Make sure it's extra dark. I like it strong. As long as the spoon is standing up in it. You can also order my merch, the We the People Will Not Comply merchandise, which is always a great conversation starter. With that out of the way, I'd like to bring us back to my friend Dak, and I want to ask you, tell us from your experience, what was it like being a Filipino woman in the Marine Corps in the 90s? And then I want you to juxtapose that with your experience in the modern age with all the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, like those kind of initiatives that you've seen roll out in the military.
Oh, absolutely. I have a very I feel like I have a really unique space in that time frame. There were very few Filipinos in the military, especially in the Marine Corps. You know, you interviewed my father, and I think he had maybe mentioned, at least I think that he mentioned that he wanted to join the Marine Corps, but that wasn't an option for him when he was in the Philippines. I think you had to recruit in Guam. And so a lot of, people who might have had interest in joining the military at that time, they would have gone into the Navy. But very few. And, of course, in the Philippines, you have the Air Force as well as I guess it would just be Navy, but Army is not there. So my dad did join the Army and went to Vietnam. And then, myself being born un-American, my dad had retired at that time, and I was in the Philippines when the Gulf War started. And I went back to college and came back to the States, went to college there at the Art Institute, and realized like none of these people are my people,
Mm-hmm.
being a military person. I just didn't find like a lot of comfort in this kind of civilianized environment. And so it came back to joining the military, and I was going to join the Army, but they kind of gave me, a hard time saying, oh, you're a woman. If you happen to pass all of our tests, I'm like, I'm 19. I can pass all these tests, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
But having had an associate's degree, that gave a little bit of clout in terms of at that time, they were really looking for, people to join into the officer ranks. But my dad, having been a Vietnam vet, he had nothing good to say about officers. So I avoided that completely. And the Army, when I walked into their recruiting command, I said, look, I'm an Army brat. I know exactly what I want to do. I want to work for AFN. That stands for
Armed Forces Network.
Network.
Yeah.
And And they were, they just gave me a hard time. They were like, well, if you happen to pass this and you happen to pass that. And I was like, I can pass anything. You know what I mean? Like, I'm 19. Physically, I got this down. I'm Asian. I'm smart. Like, don't worry about it. But he was kind of an asshole, and he was eating donuts, and he was fat. That I couldn't make it. So I was like, give me my stuff.
Things were politically less correct back then. My buddy Jen Weber, who she had to bust her ass too, and she got the runaround from all the big male, NCOs, staff NCOs. But she performed
Oh, absolutely.
exceptionally.
I think a lot of it has to do with your mental
Mhm.
capacity. Men or women, if you don't have what it takes to freaking fight when people are giving you a hard time, then you're not going to make it, most especially in the Marine Corps, or at least that has been the case to recent times. And what I mean by that is all of this DEI has really softened the military,
Mm.
in every capacity. You get offended by every little thing, and you're going to sit there and cry about it and hug it out and all this kind of stuff instead
Wait, hold on. I have my stress card.
of right.
Remember those? It's too stressful.
Exactly. And so there were a lot of changes that happened during my time. Um,
I'm
my
so glad. Sorry to interrupt. I
oh,
keep. I'm so glad that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is getting rid of all that and bringing back the warrior ethos.
oh, I agree. I
That
agree.
hasn't happened in the last, what, 30 years? Maybe more.
We haven't won wars. You know what I mean? We have not
Hmm.
won wars. Uh, Everything is very convoluted. I mean, I'm looking at these TikTok videos of service members across the board that are ridiculous and shameful.
They're
Uh,
out of uniform for starters.
Absolutely. It just, like for me, I saw a meme the other day, and it was saying that, it was making a comparison about having to starch your camis and nowadays where you don't. And it was basically saying that our time, that it was a waste of time. I took offense to that.
Wow.
Yeah,
And they
because
don't have to polish their boots either.
not today they don't. They don't
Mhm.
polish their boots because they're like
Like
they're
canvas material, like suede.
I think it's called Nobuck or something like this. Nubuck.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but during our time, just for those who are watching and listening that don't know, I was in the tricolor time of the camis, or, we call them utilities in the Marine Corps, but
Woodland camo. Yeah.
yeah, we wore the tricolor woodland
This
style.
one. Still my favorite.
That's right. That's my favorite too. And you had to starch them in the
Hmm.
Marine Corps. That's very unique to our service. And I had so much pride in my uniform. Sunday nights were used religiously to hang my camis from the rafters and douse them with, what is it, stay flow.
Hmm.
And there'd be puddles.
And we
That
had those razor blade creases.
that's
You know,
right.
I was the barracks NCO and I was the barracks inspection NCO. And I took great pride in making sure everyone was squared away.
Absolutely. And that was part of the leadership. And that to me is very telling because I think, when you are faithful in the small things, then you are able to be faithful in much greater, more difficult, situations. But to me, that starts with a uniform. Like
Hmm.
we earn a title that's not given, that is earned. You know, it's a lot to become a United States Marine, and you
Hmm.
earn that uniform, and we have taken such pride about it over the years. And I don't see that so much reflected in today's young Marine Corps, I hate to say. But then it starts to, that whole attitude, it's a flow that goes throughout, whereby it's a little bit more lax than what I'm used to. I mean, we had inspections Monday, Wednesday, Friday. As an NCO, I made sure that my Marines had a fresh haircut.
Hmm.
That was during an era that, to be considered a good Marine, you had to have a high and tight. And
And
nowadays,
in context, the women had to have their hair like perfectly pulled back in a, what do you call it?
a bun,
Yeah.
you could have it, cut, but it was very short. It could not reach your collar.
Hmm.
There couldn't be any flyaways, nothing like very feminine about your hair because that's not what you were there for.
Yeah, it wasn't about that. It
Right.
was about being a Marine rifleman first and foremost. For me, the uniform is an outward expression of an inward change and a discipline.
Absolutely. And then to see all of these people that are on TikTok and dancing around and putting on makeup, especially where you have males that are wearing
The
makeup.
transgender community.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
been
virtue signaling.
well, a lot of that to me, it invites other cultures who who are our enemies. It gives them a sense of, like there's nothing for them to be fearful of when you present yourself that way.
Hmm.
In all of these kind of petty,
Like,
things.
how does that translate on the battlefield if at the end of the day, that's what we're training for?
Free. Like, why would your enemies think that you're nothing more than a marshmallow when that's exactly the way that you present yourself as a marshmallow? Um, when my opinion is you need to show up as an apex predator and, ready to do business with anybody who wants to freaking challenge you.
Hmm.
And reality of the world is jungle rules. Either you're going to get ate up or you're, the lion that's out in the jungle and you're freaking taking care of business. But
That's the warfighter ethos, the warfighter mindset.
you can't show up as a bunny and think that your life is going to be good. You're going to get ate up. So, just watching all of this DEI stuff over the course of my time
Hmm.
as as an active duty member, and then again, like I'm divorced now, but I followed my ex-husband through to his retirement in the military. He was a graphic illustrator in our field, 4611.
Hmm. I
Um,
didn't know that.
yeah, and
That's
so
cool.
yeah, they've gotten rid of both of our MOSs at this point in the game because everybody has a phone and can take photographs and
It's not relevant anymore. Hey, Siri, make me a portrait of General so and so, you know.
right. And so that was one of the things that he did, especially when we were stationed at Paris Island together, because there were so many VIPs that came aboard. A lot of their going away presents, or just a present in it of itself, was their portraits that were done by himself, and they
Hmm.
were given as gifts.
Mm.
I followed him around and supported him as, a wife during that time through to retirement. And then I also raised my daughter who became a Marine. I worked DOD, I've worked as a contractor. So I just have a lot of experience with the entire military experience from being a child all the way to now. You brought up Washington, D.C. in the intro.
Hmm.
I left Yuma for a few years just prior to COVID. I had gotten a position to work in Washington, D.C., initially through the Navy. They were the parent command at Anacostia Bowling, right outside of D.C. So they're joint. So
The
at the time,
District of Criminals.
absolutely. I'm no joking. That's
Yeah,
the reality of the situation.
we know that now.
Oh, well, yeah. Those of us who were red pilled knew it all along. But
I still get called like a baby killer and like a boot stomping, boot licking soldier or whatever. And like, how could I be a part of that? But I like to remind those people, the Marines I served with are the best people on earth. We're all wide awake now. We know we were used as pawns in the game, and we're using that discipline we learned in the warrior ethos to fight a new battle. We're all on their side now. We're out of the matrix.
yeah. Well, I mean, there are exceptions to that in every,
I mean, my circle of influence.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. absolutely.
Speaking for myself.
Well, yeah, us, right? Like the
Mhm.
people that we know collectively, we are all of one mind, you know?
Mhm.
And one mind, one weapon.
We don't all agree on everything together, but we believe and agree on the big stuff, the important stuff.
I think foundationally, we're all fairly on the same page, right?
Mhm.
And again, that does fall back largely on our training as Marines, right? You and I have, and really, like most of my Marine friends, we have a particular vernacular and a culture that we fall back on
Mhm.
all the time. Where most recently I was in Wisconsin, and there was a Marine there, but he obviously was removed from the Marine Corps, whereas I've been in all of this time for all of the different experiences that I've had.
Mhm.
But like using our vernacular as Marines, and he would have to like explain it to his girlfriend, but
Hmm.
also look on his face like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? Like, something as simple as I'm gonna make a head call.
Or like, I'm gonna go get some gi dunk. What? What is that?
Right.
The Marine
Where
Corps terminology.
right. And for me, that's just I don't even think about it. That's my nature at this point in the game. I have to actually spend more time like figuring out what the civilian word is, for an ink stick.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It's so natural to me. It's hard to kind of come out of that character that is who I am at this point in the game. But I was there in DC starting 2020. I worked initially for the chapel as
Mhm.
an manager, but there really wasn't a whole lot to do because everything was kind of closed down, given the mandates and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then they had a change of command, that being the parent went from the naval entity and it flipped, I guess, back to the Air Force. So the parentage
Hmm.
had changed. And what had happened at that point was they really didn't know what to do with me because they brought me in under the Navy. But now, once you flipped it over to the Air Force, there really wasn't a need for my position.
Mm.
Like I find that interesting in comparison to what's going on now with Doge, right?
Yeah.
Like you're not essential, they're gonna cut you. And I was kind of sitting in that situation at the time because I had just got there, then they changed the command and they were like, well, we don't know if we need you anymore.
That reminds me of the Bob's in Office Space, the movie. What would you say you do here? I'm an essential worker.
What's crazy is that there are people who could not come up with their five things
Hmm. And they
after
complained about having to write out an outline of 5 things they did today. And they
ex-
were running side hustles while getting paid on the federal dime.
not only that is on the USA Jobs site, a lot of the times if you apply for any of the things, it's like you have to have, a master's degree or,
Hmm.
better to, I don't know, count beans. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these people are overqualified to some degree.
Hmm.
And then they overstack people. You got one person working, on group projects, right? And there's only,
Or like thousands and thousands of consulting jobs that can't produce a single shred of work they did or consultation.
right, absolutely. There's all of that. And, people will be upset, but I was like, I was furloughed, for months in 2012 under Obama, and I had to figure out some side hustles,
Hmm.
and especially with in today where people probably already have side hustles that they were basically double dipping or
Hmm.
or worse. I
Yeah.
mean,
And
I
getting their little payoffs on the side to hush hush about this or keep that quiet or vote this way.
there's a lot of you've seen that Doge has exposed a lot of things that are
Hmm.
beyond ridiculous.
Waste, fraud, and abuse.
Absolutely. And I experienced some of that too. I went from while I was working in the chapel there, I mean, it was shared with me under, closed doors or behind closed doors rather, that they were using some of what they call the credo money. And credo, I don't remember what it all stands for, but basically it's a religious program that they utilize to in support of marriages.
Hmm.
And there were particular communities that were really taking advantage of this money
To get base housing and
to get
extra money.
just to be able to fund some very questionable, like in terms of morality,
Okay.
event.
I didn't mean to laugh, but my cat just jumped up there. I was like, what's
It's fine, but like for example, the LGBTQ community was using a lot of these funds. There was a lot of, you know,
which
threats.
is a special interest group in the military now.
Correct. So they were basically like threatening that if they weren't able to get this, that, and the other, that they would, again, press the issue,
Hmm.
make powers that be, like there were chaplains who were worried about their standing. You know what I mean? Everybody's looking to get promoted, everybody's looking to retire, this, that, and the other. So you've got, a particular privileged group that wants, A, B, and C, and you're likely to just give in instead of it on to be fair and honest with everybody that's sitting on the board. They
Hmm.
definitely have privileges that nobody really wanted to talk about. And if you have a religious organization that is there, and typically you've got like a Catholic archdiocese that operates under the umbrella of the military archdiocese.
There was
And then
almost always a Protestant and Catholic chaplain, base chaplain.
right, but especially in DC, you have to give everyone the an allowance. So
Hmm.
you are a Satanist, you should be able to have services right there at the base chapel. You could reserve time for that, or you could, whatever, whether you're Muslim or Jewish or whatever, they have to give the same time and
Yeah,
availability, right?
that's where equity comes in. And I
Right.
like to remind the viewers real quick, it's not equality of what is it? It was equality of opportunity. Now they did a mission creep where it's equality of outcome, equity,
Right.
where they
And
want everyone to be equal and have the same privileges and, you know,
that's honest, right? It's not.
it has no practical application and productivity.
Well, they say it's equitable, but really what they are looking for is privilege.
Hmm.
And that's the issue that I take.
Special privileges.
They want special privileges, and
Hmm.
with the credo situation that I was explaining, that there were certain programs that they really wanted to take advantage of, and it wasn't as equal as they portrayed it to be. Um, but that said, I was there, and I then switched over to going into protocol because they had seen, hey, I'm combat camera. I went to school, basically in the same type of schools because combat camera goes to like a public affairs, it's defense information school.
Hmm.
So DINFOs.
Yep.
They got a couple things, but we go to the same school. So when they were looking to transfer me from one area, they just transferred me into protocol because there was an opening there. But I could have gone either way, protocol or public affairs. So I ended up, landing in the command staff office to do dual duty as the protocol person and the commanders. He was a full bird colonel, Air Force. I was his secretary
Hmm.
in that spot. So I was in a very good, job during a time where there wasn't a whole lot going on in the sense of they had to send people home all the time. They couldn't stay because of all of the COVID stuff.
Mhm.
Um,
So your dad dealt with the affirmative action part under, was it the tail end of the Obama administration or earlier? Was it Clinton?
my father,
Yeah.
um, he got out during Bush's era. He got out
Okay.
in, right?
So affirmative action was just starting.
Well, I mean, it had been in place since the 60s, but
Mm.
it didn't benefit him as an Asian man because I think he explained to you the command that he was at had two Asians. I think his commanding officer was like a Japanese guy.
Mhm.
And then there was somebody else like that was in the staff that was also Asian. And so they couldn't really promote him. So he had to wait a few cycles to
Yeah.
promote it. There were no Filipinos.
He had to
Like,
work harder. Yeah.
and there most especially being a woman when I was in, I was an anomaly, very much so. And by the time I was getting out of the military or headed out, like the last, year and a half, the Marine Corps tried to appeal to me on two occasions to stay and become an officer because their words were very much like the enlisted corps, or rather, the officer corps needs to reflect the enlisted.
Hmm.
They had
Diversity.
yes, they had
Yeah.
his and black women, but I was the only Filipino. And, at the time, there weren't a whole lot of people who were knowledgeable about what Filipino was. I know that when I was young, people would be like, "What are you?"
So you and your dad experienced a similar type of racism with a generational gap
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
in the armed forces.
Yeah. And so when I was in Okinawa, for example, like I was working as the commanding officers, actually the brigadier general, his personal photographer, General Rollins. I was his personal photographer.
Two finger Rollins.
That's right. And he took me to an event where I was positioning people on a riser, trying to take a group photo.
Mhm.
And he noticed that all of the men in the room, because we're talking about Japanese nationals and, Marines, all eyes were on me trying to make all of this work out. And these little Okinawan and Japanese men were very interested in me. I was walking around in my blues, looking all cute. And so I was kind of like the little talking,
Hot commodity.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So when I got back
Just
in,
like the GIs overseas, Saigon, Vietnam.
that's right. So I remember sitting in the limousine headed back to base with the general, and he wanted to get to know me. So we sat face to face and he interviewed me and he basically told me like point blank, like I spent the afternoon fielding questions about you, Lance Corporal Dacquel.
Mm,
So he's like, I tell
that's
you,
funny.
hilarious. And he said, I'm going to make you my personal photographer. And that's what happened. He would take me to these events, and on cue, he would call me over to take group photos with whomever was there. And I would, be sweet and cute. And then as I'd walk away, that was his segue into whatever. I was basically like a token piece that he utilized for that purpose.
He was always friendly to us 4,600 Marines. When I got to know him during my enlistment, he gave me a letter of recommendation, and it's still in my paperwork.
Absolutely. Well, backstory, just Tim and we I kind of singled Tim out because you had posted, if you recall, a bunch of photographs.
That was a
And
big photo dump.
it was a big photo dump. And because it was the tricolor camis, I was like,
Mhm.
that's why I was going through them. And I saw that picture of you and General Rollins together. And that's when I reached out to you, like, hey, that's my general.
We all looked up to him. He was the only active duty Marine who had the Navy Cross
That's
at
right.
that time for gallantry in combat.
Yes. And I was so that whole experience in Okinawa, honestly, it set me up.
Mhm.
Um, there was a kind of a sexual harassment thing that led up to it, but I ended up in the assistant chief of staff's office for the G6. And, two doors down is the base sergeant major and then the General Rollins' office. And he's not a big guy, and neither was Sergeant Coons or
He's short but stocky and scary. Yeah.
yeah, he has a very strong personality.
And
Um,
two of his fingers were blown off from a grenade because he picked it up and threw it to protect his Marines. And he's like,
and he was smart, like he was really smart. Like even just picking up, reading the room and realizing like this girl is gonna open a lot of doors for me. Like I would joke like at the time, like, oh yeah, you're kind of pimping me out. But it worked for me as a young Marine because I got to go to all these amazing events and talk to these, World War II veterans a lot of the time. And I got to eat off of their buffets, their very fancy event
mhm,
buffet. That was what was in it for me at the time, and it was like really great time. And just knowing him really kind of set me up for success when I went back to Paris Island as a permanent personnel. But, again, with the DEI stuff, they were looking to me. I performed well as a Marine, and they were looking for me to go to the officer corps. Um, like I said, they approached me twice to try and, persuade me to do that. But, I talked to my dad after the fact, and I was like, yeah, they were trying to get me to become an officer. And my dad was like, why didn't you do that? And I was like, because you hate officers.
yeah,
Like,
because you fit all the check marks that looked good on paper, right? For them.
but ultimately, I got caught up ironically, I got caught up in a sexual harassment case and was kind of like a casualty of the,
Why would you do such a thing? Kidding.
what do you mean?
Sexually harassing all those male Marines.
Hey, you cannot, what would you used to say? You can't rape the willing, right? Like,
Yeah.
say all that all the time, like, oh, I'm going to get you for sexual harassment. And I'm like, you have to prove that you didn't, want to be, the center of my attention.
Going back to the way the senior officers treated the 4,600 Marines, I never understood the ones who kept us at arm's length because we could make or break their campaign, and we made them look so good.
Oh, I know, right? I say that all the time when people like, rib me for being a pogue. Like, number
Mm,
one, during our time, women were really taught to support the grunt units, right? It was, free a man to fight. I came in under that, umbrella.
mm,
So we were, in support positions. I became a photographer, but there were those who were in logistics and things of that nature that were really kind of support elements. But going into, Desert Storm, you had Jessica Lynch, and I'm not remembering her name, but there was another woman who was also captured. They were running supplies and got caught on the front lines doing so, and they were imprisoned for a bit. And people forget all of those things.
yeah.
There's a different mentality where you want women, equality, but it's not equal for the men that have to work with them. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but I think that most of the Marines that I have served with, um, they were very protective
Hmm.
and would not be able to handle if I say, if I were to become a prisoner of war. And people don't want to hear this, but it's very likely that I would be raped and tortured, and I would be a means of getting into the Marines' heads. I don't want that. They didn't want that. That was something that, when I worked with my brothers, we discussed that, like Dacquel, if something were to happen to you, they would prefer a mercy killing to take me out themselves, not for lack of love, but like anticipating that the worst would happen to me if I were to fall into enemy's hands.
I've seen studies and focus groups with armed service personnel who it shows there's a decisive psychology that's totally different in men and women on the front lines, and the way you react if a male or a female is injured in the line of duty. You change, you know.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. As a matter of fact, I think I shared a little bit earlier that one of my last hurrah in the Marine Corps was to help with the Crucible. And so the Crucible did not exist. Many people do not know this, but the Marine Corps historically has been on the chopping block a couple of times where, they were going to absorb it in one of the other services, that being the Navy or the Army, given that we are also ground forces.
Mhm.
And so during that time, 95, 94, 95, there was, all of that scuttlebutt that, hey, we need to do something to show that we're different. And, we came under a lot of scrutiny because the women and men train separately. And so that was the genesis for the Crucible. They needed to show that there was, solid medical evidence, all of the sciences, supported that the psychology rather for men and women are different. And so you need to train them different if you are going to have them work together at all. So we had to prove ourselves, and we made sure to show that we train differently than the other services, that men and women train differently, but also the women Marines are that much more capable because their training is so much more in depth. So comparatively, the other services spend 8 weeks in boot camp, but Marines traditionally spend 13 weeks in boot camp. And then that's right. And then they spend another month in MCT.
Marine combat training.
Right.
Yeah. I'd like you to dive into that in the next segment, how you helped usher in the Crucible, and I'll give my personal experience with the Crucible. But for now, we have to take a short break, and we'll be right back. All right, Dak, welcome back to part 3 of this podcast. I'm having a lot of fun. I'd like to give our viewers who may not be aware about what the Crucible is in the Marine Corps and what it meant to us. If memory serves, it was a 2.5-day event that tested our physical and mental endurance. And it tested our teamwork, our ability to work under stress, and everything we learned in basic training. And it was hard. It kicked my ass. And when we got back to the tarmac, the parade deck, and we were all like, it was hot, we were sweating, there was steam coming off us, we were carrying back injured Marines who couldn't walk anymore. 9 members of my platoon couldn't walk. They could not walk. We had to carry them back, like firemen carrying them between 2 Marines like a sack of like dirty laundry. And a lot of Marines collapsed on the parade deck and openly sobbed. And then we got our Eagle Globe and Anchor signifying that we had become a Marine. What was that like for you?
So I didn't actually go through the Crucible.
Oh, okay.
And the reason there wasn't the Crucible at that time, but we did do very similar training.
Was it called something else?
I don't know. It was just, I think it was called like BWT, if I'm not mistaken. But basically we did, land nav, we did all the things that you're talking about, where, somebody would be considered dead and you had to carry them, your fire
and all the
team.
team building exercises. We couldn't get over an obstacle unless we all worked together.
Right. And so we did have something very, very similar at that time. but not the Crucible because that had not been introduced yet. I was there as permanent personnel in Paris Island following my year in Okinawa, and that's when they created the Crucible.
Maybe it
So,
hadn't been branded officially yet.
well, no, that isn't the case because we actually built all of the obstacles from
Mm.
scratch. So it was a matter of putting together the, you know, so before there was PowerPoint presentations,
Hmm.
everything needed to be put in a slide carousel. And so,
Wow. Old
right,
school. You just showed your age for the audience.
right. So all of the information that was collected via medical and then, training on Paris Island. All of that was collected. We put together all of the information for presentation to send up to headquarters Marine Corps
Hmm.
so that they get funding to actually start it.
Hmm.
And when we were a party to, the builds and things like this, because as they were building each obstacle and giving the reason why that, what the objective of each obstacle is and why that they are, they're putting this as part of the crucible, all of that, um, the combat camera, I think it was called Civic at the time. We helped put all of that together.
That was
And
during Bill Clinton's administration, right?
that's
Yeah.
correct. Leading up to this, I talked a little bit about it the last session, but that being is, a lot of people don't know that on the chopping block. They were trying to get rid of us. They were trying to, justify why, they needed the Marine Corps because we are the smallest service. Why not have them be absorbed into the Navy? Why not have them be absorbed into the Army? That was the thought process during Bill Clinton's time when they were closing down a number of bases. Some of these bases that I was raised in when I lived in Germany. Hanau is no longer a military post, and that's been from the 90s. They closed it down. Homestead in Florida, where I went to college, that was closed down, and that's an Air Force.
Hmm.
I grew up around. I grew up at Fort Bragg, and Pope Air Force Base, which was butted right up next to it, is no longer in existence. So a lot of those things were kind of did during Bill Clinton's time, where he wanted to close down some of these facilities. His thought process was that it's no longer there's no need for it because we the Cold War had come to an end. The wall had come down. There's no reason for all these military bases.
He was one of the New World Order boys. He was a Fulbright scholar and beholden to all the international bankers who
Absolutely.
backed his campaign, his administration.
Mhm. So that impacted me during my time in the Marine Corps, and that's how the Marine Corps decided to kind of, you know, move ahead of the pack and show why it is
Hmm.
that we are needed. Like ever since, like I don't know, I guess when Beirut happened, and we lost these Marines to that bombing.
Mm.
There hadn't been that. We kind of in the 80s, let me say this. In the 80s, we were really kind of known as the, 911. It's like if it absolutely needs to be
Be
destroyed,
destroyed in a day.
yeah,
In
if
case of emergency, break glass.
that's right. Call the Marines, 1-800 Marines. That was kind of our calling card back then. But then it kind of was quiet for a little while. And then it wasn't until I believe like J. Walter Thompson, they were the marketing arm that made those amazing
Mm.
commercials that
That
had
Marine you had the hots for, that poster that we all had.
that's my baby right
I'm gonna
there.
put a picture of that up for the viewers. I have a copy of that still signed by the guy.
Oh, really?
You want to buy it? No, kidding.
Was he what, a 22er? Did he commit suicide? That was the
That
scuttlebutt.
was the guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
sadly.
What's his name?
I forgot. I'd have to look it up.
For whatever reason, I'm thinking it's Eric something, but I had his poster in my room, and
He was
every
like the Ken doll of the Marines.
God, I was in love with that man. He was, I mean, I would put on my camis and kiss him goodbye for the day before I left for my office.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my baby. But yeah, J. Walter Thompson, they were in charge of the like knight in shining armor
Hmm.
commercials that came up in the 90s.
That's when
And
they incorporated CGI. He
right,
drew his NCO sword and the lightning came down like Thor. He was like, ah, like He-Man or something.
absolutely sexy, right?
Hmm.
It was sexy. They had a really great campaign.
That made people want to enlist.
That's
They're like,
right.
I want to wear that uniform.
And then ironically, not too long after the fact, they were trying to get rid of the Marine Corps. So the
Hmm.
Crucible that. And so what my issue is I know, given, having to make all these slide presentations, and I had a secret um clearance at the day during
Hmm.
that, and it was because I was handling information that was not privy to everyone, right? So like, there would be things that would come out of medical. One that stands out is like 80% of women who join the military have been abused. And so there were
Hmm.
certain that they did not want to expose women to during training because it obviously would have very lasting, traumatic effects on them. So we're talking about 80% women who join the military, not specific to the Marine Corps.
I'd like to see that actually. That's interesting.
Right. And so nowadays when you're just as women, you're exposed to the same situation as men. I I just don't think that they should be in that situation. I mean, I'm old school. I'll preface it with that. And when Pete Hegseth is saying that he does not want women in combat situations, I would agree with him. I think that there are very capable women out there, but if they were going to join the ranks of the grunts, they definitely need to, they have to earn it in such that those entities, those groups, they cannot lower their standards.
Hmm.
And, it's been proven many times over
That would be
that
detrimental to force readiness.
that
He
is
knows that.
correct. That is absolutely correct.
Our
And
enemies know it. They're like, they're going to lower their standards.
yeah. And so the problem is a lot of people think that they're being helpful by, again, this whole concept of equality, right? But
Hmm.
the reality is my fighting weight back in the day, it's changed now, but my requirement was to be no more than 127 pounds. So if realistically, my
What is
brother,
it now?
I don't know what it is now for me. I'm
Huh.
five, I'm 5'1". I'm sure we can find it. But it has changed because my daughter is 5'3",
Hmm.
and she rates to have more body weight. I did not. My max was 127, and most Marines can bench that easily
Hmm.
and away like I'm a little rag doll. Forget the fact that you have to wear, your all of your gear, your Kevlar helmet, your flak jacket and all of that, your food, you know, your magazines, all of this, right?
Yeah.
So
Dak, do
with
you know if they've lowered the standards for the PFT, the physical fitness test for non-Marines? I don't know. Have you
um
heard if they did?
I think that it's gone up from my time.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I said, we in
Higher standards.
the Marine Corps, we did sit-ups and we ran a mile and a half as women. Men had to run 3 miles for a
Hmm.
score.
20 pull-ups.
Right.
Yeah.
But we periodically have that 6 mile gut check, you know, that would wreck me. I'm 5'1",
Yeah.
I got one stride in, and the guy that's 6 foot beside me has got, 3 or 4 strides in because I'm tiny. Like, it's a lot. That's not to say that I'm not valuable in different capacities. And for those women who can, you know what? Kudos to you. But I think that the problem is you've got these politicians who've never served in the military.
And
And
their
then,
sons will never serve in the military.
I mean, especially nowadays,
Mhm.
that's true, right? But you've got these politicians who have never served, and you've got, you know, people who want to see women succeed, but I don't think that they truly understand what is necessary to survive in a military environment, especially because we haven't won any wars, right? It's everybody is so proud of what Americans do, and that's great. But there is a point where you have to look at things, stoically, realistically, pragmatically.
Mhm.
I'm not, you know,
The average person doesn't, but
I can't pull my ex-husband, out of a situation
Mhm.
when 7 pounds. I mean, I can initially, but like sustainably,
Mhm.
that's not realistic, right? I gotta,
We're talking about what's physiologically possible on the battlefield.
right, absolutely. And so all of those things have to be, thought of, accounted for, because lives are truly at stake. It's not playing freaking these video games that people kind of think it's similar to. It's not.
Mhm.
And most people can't handle stress. Everything is a safe space. So if you're not trained for that mentally, you can't put yourself in that physically. It's even worse. Your mind has to accept a certain reality before it's going to move forward, especially if your life is on the line. And yeah, there's some things that are instinctive, but when you've got a generation that's sitting here eating freaking Tide Pods, I'm going to question instinct.
I support the current thing.
Yeah.
Waving their Ukrainian flags and getting all their vaccines.
Were known as smart weapons back in the day. I don't know if you use that moniker, but we smart weapons. You're supposed to take in, what the mission is, but use your brain
Mhm.
and decisions, because your promotion warrant, you know, allows for you to do so. That we have, faith and confidence in so and so to basically do your job. So do your job. But when you are in a culture where you have to ask for permission for every certain thing, and your hands are tied, and nobody's going to take accountability because you don't know who's on first and who's on second.
And it's not a meritocracy. You're not promoted based on merit, but
Exactly.
the way you fit into a certain diversity role.
I mean,
So why bother?
correct. And I will say, I'm just going to put the cards on the table. And I would say, I worked very hard. Somebody like Jen Weber, your friend, she worked very hard. But I
She
will
was a model Marine.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you that, across the board, there were women and men that didn't make the same effort. You
Mhm.
know, and
It's always that tiny percentage that carries the rest of the unit.
it's harder on women for the fact that, I mean, again, putting my cards on the table, culturally, there's only two types of women in the military, but most especially, I mean, in terms of my experience, two types of women are going to be somebody that knows their job and doesn't sleep around. And then
Mhm.
there are only known for being promiscuous and wild and crazy. So whether or not it's true, we have a saying in the military, in the Marine Corps, is perception is reality, right? So it's hard as a woman to be taken seriously,
Yeah.
um, especially in particular environments. So, for example, Okinawa, I had, Marines cat call me all the time, thinking I was a buy me drinky girl because I'm Filipino, and a lot of the bars at the time were nothing but, women that were trafficked there.
Yeah.
And, that's how they had to survive, unfortunately. But it was a reflection on me, and that I did not welcome, but I still had to deal with the
Who's a product of your environment?
absolutely. And so it
Uh,
was, you know, um, really advocate for myself, and make sure that people respected me as a Marine first and foremost. Um,
First and foremost, a rifleman, unlike the other branches. A couple of the things you brought up made me remember the Mount facility at Second Marine Division, Camp Lejeune. We helped to usher in that facility. It was the Marine Operations and Urban Terrain. But was that something that was there during your time?
So that was fairly new and towards the end of my time. I do
Hmm.
remember Island that they had urban warfare
It was
that
creepy.
shot. Yeah, we videoed some, footage on that, but it was just getting off the ground where they were looking to make training more like ergonomic,
Hmm.
it being not in a jungle,
And it was
and
built and used and trained in right before 9/11.
right, right. There were
For the
lots.
viewers who aren't familiar with it, it was an entire fake small American town with houses, suburban houses, a local church, a post office, a city hall, and it helped Marines train in an urban environment, urban terrain. It
Yeah.
was creepy. It was almost like being in an episode of the X Files or like the Twilight Zone.
I don't know that people would find it creepy now. You know what I mean? Like
Probably
they're,
not.
yeah, because they see this kind
They've
of
been
stuff.
desensitized.
Well, it's so normal when you're, playing all of these video shooting games, to that's what you think of, right?
There was some we talked about this in my unit. There was something about it that didn't sit right. We're like, this isn't right. There's something wrong here.
I know where you're going with this, right? So,
Mhm.
basically we want to think that this is the military acting in theater overseas, but
It was an American town
there you
with
go.
American suburban houses and a Christian church with a cross on it.
That's right. So, the whole red pill is like people don't recognize the fact that your own military can be used against you. And that's
Remember during Hurricane Katrina, the journalist filmed a group of Marines, and one of the Marine corporals said, "It's really eerie. Like we may have to come around the corner and shoot an American citizen." We were like, "Why would you do that? Why would you have to?"
right.
Remember, they disarmed all the people in the that Louisiana area. The county sheriff was like, "Yeah, we're gonna take all the guns, figure it out later."
Well, one of my good friends here in Yuma, we've lost touch since, but she worked for FEMA and she had told me like she worked those things and she said, be careful because we have facilities
Mm.
basically, one of our favorite movies that we always draw from, that being, the Wolverines, uh, Red Dawn,
Red Dawn.
the encampment, and she's like, no, that's real. We have, situations that are for training, but yeah, Americans could end up in encampments just like that. And that's a big eye opener. You know what I mean? Like, in what scenario is that supposed to happen? Like, you know, we understand
A
in,
despotic scenario.
yeah, we understand in the context of the Red Dawn movie, but it was because we were invaded by, a foreign entity. But the idea that, you've got these, 3, 4 letter entities here in the United States that are planning to be able to, house Americans on our own soil, that's fucking scary.
Do you remember during the tail end of the Obama administration, his second administration, all these detention facilities popped up at Walmarts across the country? Do you remember that?
I,
Complete with barbed wire and shipping containers and
um,
like security industrial apparatuses.
it did not show up in Yuma to my knowledge, but the military, the Army proving grounds, that's what, I had been told from my friend who worked for FEMA.
Mhm.
We have a lot of Walmarts here per capita.
Mhm.
I think we have, last I heard, we had the most in the nation, but
Those have
that
all been taken down.
we didn't. But what I'm saying is, I didn't see them here in Yuma.
Hmm. I saw them in Florida and in Oregon. Did you ever see the show True on True TV Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura back in the day, like 10, 12 years ago?
I did see portions of that. And I will tell you that when I was a child, I used to watch a lot of like Nova, and there was, I don't know if, I don't remember if this particular one, like, there were several of those types of documentaries that
Mhm.
Spock, Leonard Nimoy, Spock,
Yeah,
his
those were
voice.
awesome.
Yeah.
He had the greatest voice ever.
No. Well, of the ones they were talking about, just all kinds of different things. It was a series, but
Mhm.
episodes was, you know, um, like taking trash and making food out of it. Um,
Gross.
yeah, I know.
Sounds
And
like the way they want us to eat bugs and stuff.
we are right now. I mean, everything that is going on in our life right now, I they were telling this stuff years and years ago in the 80s and in the 90s.
The revelation of the method.
They never, people just never realized that it would come true. So,
Speaking of Spock, he was in Star Trek, where Starfleet, the cadets and the officers had no private property, no children, no religion. Every second of every day was spent in service to Starfleet.
oh, well, what about, do you ever remember watching a television show called Logan's Run? You're a few years young.
Yes, I have it on Blu-ray.
That's right.
Mick Jagger,
It
was he
was,
in it?
no, Michael, I'm forgetting his
That's
name.
right. It's been a while since I watched it. It's
Yeah,
a far future dystopian.
that's right.
Yeah.
What they were doing is getting rid of anyone who over the age of 35
Mm.
because they said it was because of natural resources that they needed to preserve, and you were going to sacrifice your life for the good of the younger generation,
Euthanizing the old people.
right? But it was because they had the memories of life before having to go underground. So that was the preface, is there was a person named Logan who realized that this was all, about control, and that they were killing people, murdering people, so that the truth wouldn't get out, that the resources that were on the surface of the earth was fine. There was no, there was none of the, you know, green issues that we see in modern times. Like that was the preface for them literally driving people underground. You know what I mean?
There's so many dystopian films that have the same kind of outline. Soylent Green was another one.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So going back, I get a little sidetracked, but the reason I brought up conspiracy theory on True TV with Jesse Ventura is because he did an episode with Alex Jones about FEMA, and they found in a field in Georgia hundreds of thousands of cadaver coffins that
In
held 2 to 3 cadavers, and they filmed it. And True TV the very next day took that episode down, and all the remember TiVo? You could buy a TiVo box and it would record your favorite cable show. TiVo retroactively deleted that show from all TiVo boxes nationwide without the approval of the owner. And it's never aired again. People still upload it to YouTube once in a while. It's usually taken down. It was
oh,
crazy though. It was all done by FEMA. They were getting ready for some mass pandemic event.
that's right. That's right. And so, like I said, I have a girlfriend who she used to work for FEMA, and she would tell me these things. And, again, both of us were red pilled, so we would talk freely about this.
Mhm.
Yeah, she confirms. And that's really scary because it's Sherry. You know Sherry. I don't know if she's still on your friends list.
Yeah, we're acquainted.
Yeah, so Sherry. Um,
One of the chapters in William Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse, dealt with FEMA, and it was a recipe for the New World Order and his own research, like a capstone kind of event to kind of guide the event and so that they could use it for their purposes.
So, I mean, like when we've talked before about my red pill moment, like the whole trafficking thing, That's right here all around me in Yuma.
Hmm.
And to go to, DC and see this kind of, your crazy, flippant kind of attitude, it's like, well, yeah, it's because, you know, all of, a lot of what DC is involved in that, you
Yeah.
know, thought, supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
And
The Weinstein network, the Epstein network, the Diddy network,
sure,
Hollywood, politics, and entertainment or
you
music.
might not see it, but because I was paying attention, all of a sudden these dots were like on the board.
Hmm.
These dots are on the board.
So you've been struggling for a lot longer than most people with people kind of living in fear and living in ignorance and believing the mainstream narrative. Must have been stressful.
Oh yeah, for sure. I thrive in, having to adapt, and that's fine. But yeah, I know things that most people, they're not looking at it. You know what I mean? They're not thinking about it. It's not part of their everyday anything. So how are you supposed to be situationally aware when, your life is about making TikTok videos and you know what I mean? Like all the things that are fun. And then
Yeah.
there's another group of people who are trying to save you from yourself, and you don't even know that all these things are, you know, drilling. You don't even know. That's the
Remember in L. Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz, all it took to expose the wizard for what it was little teeny Toto, the little puppy. He just walked up and he's like, huh, what's back there? He's like, look. He was barking, like, look, it's just an old frail man pulling the levers of the machine. It's not a big scary wizard. He's lying to you. See for yourself. They're like, shut up, Toto. Stop barking.
Well, I mean, even going back to, like me resigning in DC, like everybody was so afraid of losing their jobs or like their retirement, that they weren't willing to do the right thing. They were
Yeah.
tried. And I was, and same thing with the election. People are like, well, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to do this, that, and the other, or I don't want to vote because I don't want to spend my day in a voting line. And
Mhm.
I was like, well, I mean,
That's a lack of civic duty.
you're hard, right? It's like, I mean, bread lines are long too. So, pick your heart. You can go and vote. And I get the part where everyone is like, or, people like us are like, it's all, a different wing of the same bird. But like, again, I draw on, if you cannot be faithful in the small things, how are you going to be faithful in the harder, more difficult things?
Mm.
Can't do your civic duty and sit on a jury and call out what is evil and what is good, and you know give people justice that they need, and that requires being decisive.
But they might miss their football game.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's the part where I get very annoyed with people, because you get out exactly what you put into it, which is nothing, right?
Mhm.
You haven't sacrificed or worked for anything, but you want somebody to carry you through and make it all better. And we all have to, fight our position. And a lot of people are just kind of sitting on their hands doing nothing, not even thinking about it. And then you've got the military, like we were talking about earlier, they're doing TikTok dance videos. And I'm like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. A friend of mine years ago said it's like the first half of the average person's life. They want to break out and make contracts and get out there and explore and take risks. And then they realize how hard it is. And then they spend the second half of their life trying to crawl back into surrogate wombs to look for ways to get away from reality, to crawl back in the womb because it was safer in there, it was warm, it was cozy. It's too hard out here. That's like the average kind of person that wants to defer critical thinking and Not be responsible, not be a real person, to be like Pinocchio.
Yeah. I mean, look at Cypher from
Hmm. Put me
the
back in.
back in, plug me back in. I just don't want to remember. I
Yeah.
don't want
And then he betrayed everyone who had woken up for
right,
personal gain.
right, absolutely.
Hey, Dak, you mentioned that you resigned in DC. And
Mhm.
in the next segment, I want you to go into that a little bit, and then
Okay,
we'll close it out with that.
sure.
We'll be right back after this.
I'll wait 1,000 years just to see you smile again. Kill your prayers for love and peace. You'll wake the thought police. We can hide the truth inside. It could be wrong, but it shouldn't be right. It could be wrong, so let our hearts ignite.
All right, we're back with my Marine buddy, Dacquel Ochoa. I'd like for you to tell the audience about your resignation during the what I refer to it as the COVID madness and your experience with that. And why did you choose to do it on the date which you did?
You know, I think all of that has significance trying to drive home a point. And leading up to the Bill of Rights Day, which is December 15th,
Mhm.
you know, when I was at the command, they were making us write a letter so that we could ask for what do they call this? Religious exemption. That's what it was.
Mhm.
And I wrote it, but it started to really set into me like, who has the authority to make a decision on my relationship with God? You know what I mean? And that's when it started to kind of rub me really wrong. Like, who has the authority? Who's going to say that I do or I don't?
Mhm.
And of course, being in DC and working for the chapel and knowing what was going on behind the scenes, I was really kind of annoyed for the fact that, I worked for the chaplain corps and they were all afraid to do or say anything. And these are colonels, full bird
Yeah.
colonels that I was having conversations with. And again, there was a JAG officer that as these things started ramping up, I'd be in the hallway talking with a full bird colonel who didn't know a JAG officer, nonetheless, that didn't know what way he was going to go, waiting on, all of the mandates to solidify and come down the pike. But
For
in
the
my
viewers who
mind,
aren't aware, JAG is the Judge Advocate General Corps
right.
that JD Vance served under.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the fact that we would have these conversations, and here I am, I'm a Marine corporal, and I'm having conversations with Air Force colonels that were asking me like, what do you think you're going to do? What would you do? Like just, and it was a friendly conversation, but when I look back on it now, I think that that's really significant that they didn't want to do anything. They were just going to kind of go with the flow. And my job as a protocol specialist, there were more than a few times where I'm writing talking points for speeches that people have to give, or,
Mhm.
a lot of times I have to, you know, um, print out your oath of office so that they could, have someone read it. Like I'm printing this out, I'm looking at it, I'm cutting it to size so it fits in the presenter's hand, and here I am looking at this oath of office every day and thinking to myself, well, what they're making us do is unconstitutional. And then, of course, I'm all like, well, anything that is unconstitutional is null and void. So,
Especially as a federal employee.
absolutely. But anything that I would say, like I said, they had us write this letter, and it was so that we could have some sort of religious exemption. It started with that, and then it started snowballing, and I would bring up my points to my immediate managers and directors and such,
Mhm.
and they didn't want to make a call. And like, as Marines, we're taught to take charge of a situation. It should be taken care of at the lowest echelon, right? And so here I am, like, hey, this is a red flag, this is a red flag. And nobody was willing, with all of their rank on their shoulder, they were unwilling to make sacrifices or say anything or question anything.
It's such an indictment against people that lack the backbone and stand on principle. From my experience, acting on principle always requires a sacrifice.
Absolutely.
And so many men and women that stood on principle were forced out of the ranks, which left who?
Oh, I
Who
was
was left?
livid. I was livid, and I could see that. I could see that they were, thinning the herd so that, like we talked about earlier,
And
they
it
could
left a
keep
bunch of order following do-gooders who
right.
just went along to get along.
But that goes back to the urban training that we were talking about, right? Because worst case scenario, you've got, a force that are so blinded that they would turn on the American people. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Like people don't question, like when we were young and in the Marine Corps, it was like, you are a smart weapon, smart. And there was always a distinction when it came to following lawful orders.
Yeah.
But at that time, I had seen where they were saying, oh, well, these people are not following orders, but they removed that word, lawful.
Yeah.
They removed that word. And so I was like, you know what? I can't do it. There was a master sergeant, an Air Force master sergeant, that came to see me, and we had another conversation in the hall because he knew my position before everything really went off, the rails. And he had explained to me that he has like 18 years in the Air Force, and he was raised Catholic, and so he had done his research, and he didn't like the fact there was aborted material in there. And he said, but his family needed for him to retire. And so he felt that he was making his sacrifice by going ahead and agreeing to take the vax. So he tells me that wherever it was that they were administering this shot, that he got up to the front of the line and had an attack of conscience. And he started to just
better late than never.
Right? Well, not only that, he had been a victim of sexual assault when he was young. He was molested. But that said, when he got up to the front of the line, he was kind of hesitant, and whoever was there tried to calm him down. And when it didn't work, they forcibly gave him the shot. They held him down and gave him the shot.
For me, that is right up there with sexual assault of a minor or an innocent person.
That is rape. Because it's penetration.
It's forcing you to violate your body, your personal, what do you call it?
Needle dick.
Yeah.
You had to take a needle dick. That's what you had to do.
It's in the same category of evil for me as violating someone's body.
Oh, it is. It physically is. And so that was
whoever
another
did
thing.
that, whoever was a part of it, is going to face some serious consequences, maybe in this life or the next.
Correct. I fully believe that. And, anytime I have talked about it, I put that in people's mind, right? Like this, like when I say, penetration, when I say, needle dick, I want people to understand it's the same thing. It's rape. It's rape. It is. They can't make you do something against your will. And so
these are the reasons why I fought so hard to get a religious exemption from immunization form for my daughter.
Right. And
it wasn't easy.
Part of the reason, like after my divorce, I had stayed in Yuma because my daughter was attending a Christian school that did not require her to have any vaccines. They didn't look into it. It was just like, it was fine. It's a private school, so there was no requirement for it. So she really, she had whatever vaccines were necessary back in the day to go to the child care facility on the base. But once she was able to go to school and I was able to put her in a Christian school that didn't require it. She didn't have any other vaccines because by this time I was doing my research very heavily and I did not want her to partake in any of those things. So it was something that was already on my radar since the 90s, when it was kind of put out there. Like a lot of the AIDS epidemic is man-made. And of course, in the beginning, I was like, that's crazy. There's no way. But
Remember
then
who
when
was
you
deeply
find
involved
out,
with that? Dr. Fauci in
that's
California.
right. That's right.
They still remember the gay
Mhm.
community in California.
That's right. And I've lived, a stone's throw from those communities. Like in Fort Lauderdale, it's, Las Olas back in the day.
Yeah.
And when we were on recruiting, when my family was on recruiting, we lived a stone's throw from Castro Street right there in San Jose. So it's not like I don't know or understand those communities. And again, I got to the point where I was looking at all of this as rape, and they told me, well, if you don't take the shot, then you have to subject yourself to having a swab up your nose, like a Q-tip up your nose every week.
And it goes like all the way back into your nasal cavity, like
That's right.
touching your brain.
And so what I had
which
said
is also could be construed as rape. Like they're forcing to penetrate your body with something you don't want.
So your Fourth Amendment is, against illegal search and seizure.
All persons shall be protected from unreasonable search and seizures.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when you're swabbing, my nasal cavity, or you want to put something in my mouth, I was like, and you know how we are, like, hey, today it's my nose, tomorrow it's my ass, right? Like, where do we draw the line?
Yeah.
Where do we draw the line? And when I was asking these questions to my command, first of all, I think they were kind of surprised because I have a potty mouth, but hey, we're Marines. And I really needed to get the point across. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you put this swab up my nose, like which version of the COVID, virus is it going to detect? Because at this point there was like a dog one, a monkey one. Well, which one? And they couldn't answer the question. And so I'm like, not only that, they wanted my boss to swab me. And I'm like, well,
is he a medical professional?
Yeah, she's not a medical professional. Exactly. So needless to say, the people who were over me were unhappy with me because the Air Force wanted 100% compliance.
You flipped over their apple cart.
Yeah, exactly.
So all these reasons compelled you to resign, and you submitted your resignation letter on Bill of Rights Day. Can I read the preamble to the Bill of Rights?
Absolutely.
I think it's pretty important in this context. So the Bill of Rights was pushed through by the states who've thought that the Constitution of the United States didn't have specific limitations on the government for individuals. So this was a result of that. The conventions of a number of states having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. That's the preamble to the Bill of Rights. You did it on Bill of Rights Day. We were federal employees. You were a federal employee submitting a resignation letter in Washington, D.C. on Bill of Rights Day.
All right. I did.
Based on the fact that they abused their powers and you lost public confidence in the government.
Absolutely.
That did not ensure the beneficent ends of its institution.
Yes. And
it's really sad.
Yeah.
They lost a good Marine.
They did. And, it was so funny because the director of civilians was like, why does it have to be you, Dacquel? And he was a Navy guy. And we had this thing kind of going like Navy Marine Corps team against the Air Force. But when push came to shove, well, I was by myself.
Yeah.
And when he asked me that question, like, why does it got to be you, Dacquel? And I was like, because Marines are the first to fight,
Someone
sir.
has to take a stand.
Absolutely. It became a hostile environment, um, you know, because there was a lot of people who, they were very paranoid about catching it. And
Yeah.
yet, you know, to me, I'm like, if this were really happening, you couldn't control. There would be so many people just dropping dead, like a plague, that you couldn't control it.
There
But
weren't
then
stacks of body bags on the sides of the road.
right.
There wasn't even official PPE. It
Nope.
was non-medical grade PPE.
Correct. And as Marines, you're trained with a real freaking
Mhm.
gas mask. So this flimsy little thing that they were making you wear was ridiculous.
The mop gear we had to wear for CS gas. Like, come
Correct.
on.
Correct. Like people don't have that frame of understanding to challenge the system.
Yeah.
They see their doctors and nurses wearing them and they think, okay, well, we're going to follow suit and it'll be fine. And I'm like, if you're talking about plague level shit, like this is not going to cut it.
They ordered the little custom made cloth masks from Etsy.com that showed, Hello Kitty or whatever.
Right.
That's not
But,
real.
but then you would go out into the town and they had these little tents that allowed people to eat at restaurants. But I was like, it's still enclosed. You're still breathing the same stinking air.
Yeah. My
You
buddy
know,
Ben Roche, who I had on as a guest recently, we talked about advocacy at the local level. He said that they book a RV camping site every year at the same place in the woods.
Mhm.
I forget which lake it is here in Oregon. But so the government encouraged social distancing. It's like, oh, cool, we're gonna go camping more. So we booked more spots. Then when they went to go, they shut the campsites down. So they couldn't even actually go social distance out in the woods to get away from people. They had to shut those down too. It didn't make any sense to a rational thinking person.
Well, even that, I am also looking at the fact that when you separate prisoners, right? That's what you do. You round them up, but then you separate them so that they can't come up with a plan to overthrow whatever the threat is.
Mhm.
So think about that. And you
They
just,
can't coordinate.
they're
Yeah.
right, right, exactly it.
And lockdowns are for sick people, not healthy people.
That's right. Absolutely. So,
Quarantine.
yeah. And see, think about like, okay, quarantine, even that, they had to change the name, just like they have to change, what is a woman? The vernacular has to change because
Mhm.
there are certain rules that they have to abide by. So, like, for example, you cannot be quarantined because there's a timestamp on a quarantine. You can only be quarantined for so long. So then they have this restriction of movement, right? That doesn't have the same restrictions, for lack of a better word. You know what I mean? Like you can only be quarantined for so long and then you have to be in a separate environment.
Yeah. But think
So
about all the fear-based mind control programming they unleashed at us in the media. It tried to keep people in that base level fear state, the fight or
right,
flight scenario.
right. And I'm just kind of over it in the sense of I've always had to question authority and
Yeah.
in some cases, like I said, I mean, when I was saying earlier that they wanted to recruit me, when you're talking about, oh, merit based, this, that, and the other, there were times that, I think that because I am Filipino, it wasn't necessarily merit based. You know what I mean? Like they were looking for somebody that looked like me, but what they didn't account for is I'm not one to be easily controlled.
Hmm.
I ask freaking questions because, again, my framework is wired different than the average person. I'm kind of like, yeah, this mask, it's for shit. This isn't going to work for anything. This doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense. You know, I'm like, this is basic, you know,
For
communication
me, the mask
disease.
was like an outward expression of a surrender. Like, look,
Oh,
I'm submitting to authority. Oh, okay. I know who you are. I see
exactly.
you. That's how I thought of looking at all these masked
Oh
people.
yeah, it was very comparative to like a muzzle.
Yes.
That's pretty much what it was.
And all the children in school, their testing took a nosedive because they lost all this tactile information. They couldn't see the teacher's mouth. The grammar collapsed. The speech classes results collapsed.
I have less of a problem with that personally because I have fallen out with the Department of Education long time ago.
Mhm.
That was part of the reason I joined the military
Looks
is
like they're on the way
because
out, though.
I'm glad. You
Yeah,
know, we had that conversation before, like what would be the first thing you would do if you were in charge? And I was like, we need to get rid of the Department of Education because they're teaching all this craziness.
it's a
And that's what
failed
you
institution.
absolutely. And how do you recruit patriots out of that when they teach you to hate your own country?
Hmm.
And I was like, you have you ever been to another country? Like all these kids who hate on America. Have you been to another country?
Hmm.
And if so, were you there? Like, what was your reason for being in that situation? Were you there simply because you were on vacation? Because being a tourist and hanging out in the tourist spots are not the same as being in the weeds where
Hmm.
there is true suffering and, you know, poverty, real poverty,
The
you know, where
humanitarian operations we conducted, like, I was like, oh my God, I'm so thankful to be in America. No, we're
absolutely.
always so grateful to go back home to from
Americans
third
are
world
very
countries.
generous,
Mm.
but it's to the point of naivety, right? Like you just want to give your taxes, but you really don't think of how it's being used against you and
Yeah,
against your children. And I am, you know, avid about like livid about how the money has been laundered and used. So again, going back to the trafficking thing, all those dots were just on the board for me and I could see clearly that these things were evil, you know, and I'm just like, I'm not going to stand for that. You
truly
know,
evil.
I, I
And all
have
it took
two,
was a 5'1" Filipina female Marine to come in and pull the rug out from your command staff who didn't have the balls
no. And then they
to
just
stand on
treated me.
principle.
Yeah. And the thing was, I'm sure that they didn't, they just kept, they continued to march and it didn't affect them. Like they really threw all of that under the rug. They didn't think two shits about me after the fact. But, you know, hopefully that will change here in a hot second. You know, I've been reaching out and asking for my case to be reopened and reevaluated to that
Hmm.
extent because I think that there are others like me in the states that, you know, or maybe even around the world when it comes to DOD that have, you know, stood up to the vaccine and things that are like it on principle and have maybe suffered, you know, all the financial hardships to that end. And I think that they need to be recognized and, you know, given a chance to, again, you know, work in a capacity that's commensurate with their patriotism. You know what I mean?
Maybe some of
Like,
them will be honored in what Trump has referred to as the Garden of Heroes.
I would, I mean, I'm not looking for like, you know, that type of attention. That was never my reason for doing it. It was my fight, you know, like when I talk about, you know, my grandfather and my father and then
Mhm.
there was me and I was like, I'm not going to roll over. Like I understand what a breadline looks like. I know what real poverty looks like.
Yeah,
And when you've got nobody that's going to stand up because they're looking at their comfort, and I was like, okay, well, I'm a Marine. Like we don't do comfort. Like that's not who we are. We're good in the mud. We're good, you know, in all these uncomfortable spaces because that's how we train. You know what I mean? And I was so annoyed with just the culture of that time. You know, that people were just again just rolling over and, you know, playing dead so that they could
I want to get
escape.
my benefits.
Yeah,
You know,
escape any type of hardship. And, you know, again,
I don't
I'm
want to
looking
risk
at
my pension.
exactly. I'm sitting here looking at the oath of office every stinking day. And I'm like, really? You guys, the hypocrisy of it was sickening to me.
Yeah.
It really was. So yeah, we'll see what happens in the next few months on how some of the efforts that I've have taken will pan out. I am hoping for the best. We'll see. It's been a rough road.
There was something Samuel Adams wrote that just came to mind, and I'd like to read it real quick.
Yes.
He wrote, "If you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animating contest of freedom, go home from us in peace. We ask not your counsel nor your arms. Crouch down and lick the hand that feeds you. And may your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you are our countrymen." I think about all those people who participated in the misery and suffering and just destroying people's lives.
Do you have my resignation letter in front of you?
I do. Can I show it to the audience?
Would you read it out loud too? I mean, I don't have it in front of me, so.
Let's see here. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back. Oh, yeah, I do have it.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
I texted it to you.
December 15th, 2021. I'll show it. I'll put it up on the screen for the audience. I hereby tender my notice of resignation as a sitting protocol specialist of the 11th Wing, Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, District of Criminals. I request an executive date of Friday, May 20th, 2022, or as otherwise adjusted by addendum in keeping with the integrity of my annual and sick leave entitlements, a leave request to follow. I do not consent or desire to accept any of the following: COVID-19 vaccine or any subsequent variant or make, either FDA approved or not. Remember, the FDA approves bisphenol A and products marketed to children. I have a religious exemption as guaranteed to me and to every American by the Constitution. I expect it to be honored, as no persons have the authority to judge the sincerity of my beliefs.
That's right.
I answer to my God, not my government. I am entitled to petition the government in protest. I do not consent to an illegal search and seizure of my personhood, and cannot be coerced or manipulated into compliance of an unconstitutional mandate. I have the right to remain silent regarding my status. I have the right to privacy. I have the right to be free from harassment and a hostile working environment following spillage of my personal information. In closing, my reason for submitting this letter of resignation: lack of trust and confidence in leadership's ability to uphold their oath of office as a condition of my employment in defense of the U.S. Constitution. A quote by Thomas Jefferson that you left at the end here: "A Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government, and what no just government should refuse or rest on inference. I stand." And then you signed your name and your digital signature at the end.
That's right.
I stand. I might add, on principle.
Oh, sure.
Unlike your whole command staff.
That's right. To include all the leadership, those are all like colonels and above.
I think I'd like to close this out with, you made me remember the NCO creed in our discussion. Yes. And I'd like to read that for the audience, and it's a good reminder to us and our fellow Marines who are listening. The non-commissioned officer's creed of the Marine Corps. I am the backbone of the United States Marine Corps. I am a Marine non-commissioned officer. I serve as part of the vital link between my commander, all officers, and enlisted Marines. I will never forget who I am or what I represent. I will challenge myself to the limit and be ever attentive to duty. I am now more than ever committed to excellence in all that I do, so that I can set the proper example for other Marines. Forgive me. I will demand of myself all the energy, knowledge, and skills I possess, so that I can instill confidence in those I teach. I will constantly strive to perfect my own skills and to become a good leader. Above all, I will be truthful in all I say or do. My integrity shall be impeccable as my appearance. I will be honest with myself, with those under my charge, and with my superiors. I pledge to do my best to incorporate all the leadership traits into my character, for such is the heritage I have received from that long, illustrious line of professionals who have worn the blood stripe so proudly before me. I must give the very best I have for my Marines, my Corps, and my country, for though today I instruct and supervise in peace, tomorrow I may lead in war. Dak, I appreciate you. I'm proud of you
Thank you.
for taking a stand and remembering your oath and standing on principle.
Yes. And
I hope it inspires a lot of people.
exactly. That was what I was going to say. I really hope that people find their heart and their backbone, and, that we put those expectations and that we demand accountability where it is necessary.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time, my friend.
Yes,
fellow
absolutely.
Marine.
Yes.
We'll talk
I
soon,
will.
right?
Yes, absolutely. I gotta kind of get out of here,
Yeah.
but
All right.
I'll see you
Thanks
again
for
soon.
joining us. Absolutely. This is Tim with America the Battlefield and Dacquel Ochoa, former Corporal of Marines who stood on principle. Let
Have
her
a good one.
experience be a lesson to all of you.
Thank you very much. Take care, all.
Bye for now.
Bye.